Chapter 13. 1 week after being in isolation, Rachel was back in her cell room. Lying on her bunk, Rachel stared blankly at the dull grey ceiling. The usual din of the women's wing, laughter, cursing, the occasional shouting match, was strangely subdued. A rare and uneasy silence settled over the space, as though they knew something had changed in her. The women around her, usually relentless with their questions, held their peace. The whispers and speculative glances came, but no one dared to press her for details. Kate Jones' voice broke the silence. "How was it in isolation?" she asked softly. Rachel swallowed hard and refused to meet Kate's gaze. "I don't want to talk about it," she murmured, her voice brittle. She was still trying to process her life. Kate studied her for a moment. "That difficult, huh?" she asked gently. Rachel didn't answer straight away. Her shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of her as she stared at the wall. She rubbed at her temples as though trying to press the noise out of her head. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely there. "I just need some space." Kate hesitated. Her head bobbed as she exhaled slowly. Without another word, she turned and headed downstairs to the common room, where the others waited, hungry for gossip. When they saw her shake her head, they knew she had nothing to give them. That night, sleep evaded Rachel. In a short span of time, her world had collapsed in on itself. Chelsea townhouse to concrete slab, silk sheets to thin prison-issue blankets, warmth to the metallic chill of custody. But none of that compared to the horror that replayed behind her eyes every time she dared to blink. The memory didn't come back whole. It never did. It came in pieces, jolts of sound, flashes of colour, and sensations with no beginning and no end. A hallway, too narrow, too dark. Edward's voice? Rachel? Or was that later? Or earlier? Footsteps. She remembered footsteps. Heavy, no. Light, no. Rushing. The sound scraped against her spine. A shape moved at the doorway, behind her or inside her own head. Then the knife. But she didn't remember picking it up. She never remembered that part. It simply appeared in her hand as though her body had acted without permission. A shadow leaned close, hands on her shoulders, gripping, dragging, tearing her back into a place she had escaped years ago. Or so she thought. She remembered screaming, but maybe that sound was Edward, or no, Charlotte, or her imagination. Then warmth, too warm, pulsing against her palms. She saw red, but sometimes, in the fractured versions of the memory, it looked black, thick, like oil. Edward's face flickered in and out of focus. His eyes were wide, confused, hurt, or did they accuse? She couldn't tell anymore. The memory wouldn't stay still long enough to give her certainty. Then everything went blank, a void, a great, terrible silence. The shock lifted just enough for her to understand one thing. She was no longer in their home. She was in the cell, cold, alone. The memory came in splinters, cutting her every time she tried to gather it into something coherent. How had she, Rachel, become this? How had love twisted into tragedy? How had her terror mistaken him for a threat? And the worst part, the part she could barely survive, was the constant, gnawing knowledge that no matter how fractured her memory became, she could not forgive the woman at its centre. She was unforgivable. It was 5 a.m. when she finally gave up trying to sleep. The dim grey light of dawn seeped in through the small barred window. She swung her legs over the edge of the bunk, her body stiff from another night on the thin, foldable mattress. The linens, scratchy and worn, offered no warmth, no comfort. A few days ago, she had been living in a Chelsea flat, surrounded by wealth and security. Now she was here, trapped behind iron and concrete. She needed to move, to do something other than drown in her thoughts. Nothing could justify what she had done to Edward. She slid off the bunk and padded toward the communal washroom. The overhead lights had just snapped back on, signaling the end of the night lockdown, and the women were free to move again. As she approached the doorway, the stench hit her. Sweat, urine, the sour tang of vomit, and something unnameable that clung stubbornly to the tiles. She hesitated. Go back to bed or endure this? She desperately needed the miracle of what water did to her in the mornings, and so she pushed the door open and gagged as the odor thickened. She splashed cold water on her face. The reflection that stared back at her was unrecognizable, haunted and broken. Would my past be prosecuted too? She asked her reflection. She slammed her hands against the sink and screamed in anguish, the noise reverberating in the cold room. She despised herself for everything, for being a victim, for dragging Edward into her pain, for the endless guilt and uncertainty that would follow her for the rest of her life. Kate Jones entered the toilet silently, her face etched with concern. The lines on her forehead deepened as she took in Rachel's anguish. She didn't need words to understand the depth of the young woman's torment. It was worse than a prison sentence, worse than the death penalty even. Rachael was already dead inside, trapped in a purgatory of her own making. Kate Jones crossed the room and wrapped her arms around Rachael. For a moment, Rachael resisted, stiff, but then she collapsed into Kate's embrace, her body shaking with sobs. She wept for her past, her future, for Edward. The inmates who were awake pondered their own burdens and were grateful they didn't carry the weight Rachael bore. Her cries echoed through the corridors, raw and unrelenting. Rachael blamed herself for directing her fear at the wrong person. Edward loved her beyond reason, and she had put him in harm's way in a single act. She wished she could take his place, or at least undo the fatal mistake, but now she was a prisoner in every sense, physically, emotionally, and mentally. She deserved punishment, not forgiveness. Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Psalm 130, verse 1a.